Folks, we are ready to begin. Camera is rolling, and we are so amazingly amazed to see the level of engagement in this community. I'm Linda Mattis O'Connell. I'm the convener of the League of Women Voters of Springfield. And I really want to thank, from the bottom of my heart, Jan Kruger and the Loomis Lakeside Activities Committee, who reached out to the League because Jan, some of you may know, was a League member who moved here from New Hampshire and said, we need to do the kinds of things that the League does, which is inform and educate voters. And also thank you very much to Tina Ferry and Carol Constant on the Loomis staff for their commitment to bringing this kind of an educational, engaging event to the community and opening it up to the general public. I would like to say a word about the League. The League of Women Voters was founded in 1920. It is the living legacy of the fight for votes for women. When we got the vote, we thought, okay, that's great. Now we need to use it. And we have been for 98 years helping to inform and empower voters and to defend democracy. We encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of public policy issues, and we do advocacy work. We influence public policy through education and advocacy after making a very careful study of the issues and taking League positions, which go back as far as 1920. Ultimately, the League of Women Voters envisions a democracy where every person has the desire, the right, the knowledge, the confidence, and the ability to participate. Now for the format of this evening. We are here to discuss the 3 questions that you will be asked to vote on in the November election. Actually, early voting, as you all know, since you came through the hallway, begins on October 22nd. We will have 3 questions on the ballot that the voters of Massachusetts are being asked to legislate, essentially. We are doing this evening in 2 segments. The first segment, as if you've looked at the papers that were on your table, outlining the ballot issues and the League positions. On question 1, which would set patient-to-nurse ratio limits, the League of Women Voters has taken no position. We have positions that would support either side. So we are doing here a voter service forum where we will hear from a speaker on the yes side and on the no side. We will take a short break after we've heard the arguments for and against, or for a yes vote and a no vote on question 1. And then we will go to questions 2 and 3. Question 2, to establish a citizens commission to propose a constitutional amendment addressing money in politics and corporate rights. And question 3, upholding the state law prohibiting discrimination based on gender identity in places of public accommodation. The League is urging a yes vote based on our positions, and we will hear from speakers on the yes side of that issue to lay out the advocacy case for that yes vote. I want to make it very clear once again that the League has no position on question 1. We are neither advocating for nor against question 1. There's material on the table for you to look at from both sides of that issue, and also material from the other questions. Following each segment, we will accept questions from the audience. It's very traditional League to take questions on index cards to make it easier for people to understand and hear the questions. If we have time, and it seems logistically possible, we will offer to pass the mic for questions, which we would then have to repeat from the podium so that they can be recorded. So we will begin now with question 1, setting patient to nurse ratio limits. Our speakers have tossed a coin for who goes first. They will each present for a maximum of 5 minutes, and then they will have 2 minutes apiece to respond and rebut the other person's arguments. And then we will have a 1-minute closing statement in the opposite order from the opening statements. We will give you 5 minutes. We have a timekeeper, hold up your card so people can get the idea, thank you. We'll give you a 60-second warning, a 30-second warning, and then we will ask you to stop. At which point, we hope if you're not finished, you will wrap up in a few short words. Thank you. So the winner of the coin toss was Donna Stern, who will speak to yes on question 1, establishing by law patient to nurse ratios. Donna is a nurse at Bay State Franklin Medical Center, and she is a regional director of the Massachusetts Nurses Association, which is the strong advocate for yes position. Donna participated in drafting this question as a member of the Mass Nurses Association board. So Donna, with no further ado, as they always say, please.
So, what I want to say about question 1. In this day and age, you are only admitted to a hospital because your condition is so severe, you need around-the-clock monitoring and care from a registered nurse. While you may see a physician for 5 minutes, your nurse is responsible for your safety every minute you are in the hospital. Nurses are there to administer and monitor your reaction to medications, to monitor and dress surgical wounds, to monitor and manipulate all the sophisticated technology that you may be connected to educate you and your family about your condition and what you need to do to stay well once you go home. Our ability to provide this care is totally dependent on how many other patients we are caring for at the same time. More time with your nurse means better, safer care for you. Higher patient assignments are associated with more deaths, more medication errors, more hospital-based infections, higher rates of readmission. It is not uncommon for a nurse in Massachusetts to be assigned twice as many patients as they safely can care for at one time. Nurses say this law is necessary because hospital executives assign them too many patients to safely care for at one time and then tell nurses to deal with it. Now nurses say hospital executives are using those same bullying tactics on question 1, spending tens of millions of your taxpayer dollars to deceive you through advertisements, even claiming nurses opposed limits on patient assignments when it was nurses, bedside nurses, who put this on the ballot in the first place. We wrote this for you. When you push that call button, every minute you wait for your nurse could be a minute that determines whether you have a healthy recovery or a serious complication. Today in Massachusetts hospitals, except for ICUs, there is no law, no limit to guide the number of patients that can be assigned to a nurse at one time. The Patient Safety Act will dramatically improve safety in Massachusetts hospitals by setting a safe maximum limit on the number of patients assigned to a nurse at one time, while providing flexibility to adjust nurse-patient assignments based on specific patient needs. Contrary to false claims by our opponents, the law provides frontline nurses with full autonomy to determine the care based on actual needs of patients. Right now, nurses have no autonomy to make those decisions. The law values and protects all members of the healthcare team, explicitly prevents the reduction of aides, technicians, and all other professionals and caregivers in meeting the limits set by the law. It also allows hospitals to exceed those limits in times of national or state emergency. Nurses report serious risks and consequences to unsafe patient assignments. Data from the 2018 State of Patient Care, a biennial survey of all nurses in Massachusetts. Nearly 9 in 10 nurses report they will vote yes for the Patient Safety Act. 64% of nurses report injury and harm to patients due to understaffing, up from 46% since 2014. 90% of nurses report they don't have time to properly comfort and care for patients due to unsafe patient assignments, up to 82%. California set these patient limits in 2004, and the results have been universally positive. Independent peer review studies have found that patients in California receive more than 3 hours more of patient care per day than the patients in Massachusetts do. 47% faster ER times, lower rates of hospital-based infections, lower rates of readmissions. This has all been studied, and we have all the data and all the research that supports what we're standing for. All we have to do is have the will to do it, and we have to put aside corporate profits for patient needs. We wrote this for you. We're asking you to vote yes, because a vote yes is a vote for yourself.
There.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is speaking no, for a no vote on question 1, is Frances Marthone. Frances is Mercy Medical Center's Chief Nursing Officer and Vice President of Patient Care Services. She is a member of the American Nurses Association. Thank you.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to do some educational session on this ballot. So let me get my... Okay, so just so you have the facts of how the ballot is written, so you understand what it's asking you to vote for. The Massachusetts Nursing Association put this ballot on in front of you. It's asking for a staffing ratio be mandated by law that requires the mandate to be in place at all times in all hospitals with no flexibility, regardless of local circumstance. This initiative would increase hospital costs, impose a mandate, require hospitals to comply with the ratio without reducing any other staff or ancillary support in the building, required implementation of a patient acuity system, which would be used to help decide how sick the patients are, and it will impose a $25,000 fine every time a hospital is outside of compliance. So we heard about California. So let me continue. So the MNA represents 25% of the nurses in the state of Massachusetts. So we have about 150,000 licensed registered nurses, and they represent about 1 in 4. They have proposed legislation like this before in the last 20 years and have been unsuccessful. In 2014, we did come to a compromise and set a mandated staffing ratio in the ICUs, the intensive care units, and the NICUs, the neonatal intensive care units. California is currently the only state to impose mandatory staffing ratios. And to date, there is no proof that that has improved care in the state of California. Several other states have considered doing a similar mandate, but have not. These are the numbers for California versus what the state of Massachusetts, the MNA is asking the state of Massachusetts to do. So California had 5 years to roll out this plan. The governor, it went before the public, and the public voted it down, and the governor put it in place the following year. So they had 5 years, 2004, to roll this plan out. In California, there are no penalties. Med-surg nursing in California is 1 to 6, ended up at 1 to 5. They're asking us to do a 1 to 4 ratio. The psychiatric hospitals, behavioral health in California have a 1 to 6 ratio, and here it's being required that we do a 1 to 5 ratio. Maternity, mothers and babies, in California have a 1 to 8, that's moms and babies, and here it's 1 to 6. So if California is the golden standard, then why are the numbers so different for Massachusetts? The law did not improve patient safety or outcomes in the state of Massachusetts. In the state of California. It did increase costs. It led to staffing cuts, increased wait times in the emergency rooms, disproportionate effects on safety net hospitals, which are mostly smaller community-based hospitals. It did lead to many hospitals closing in the state of California. This was an independent study, and it is quoted here, hospital closure. So in 2016, there were 34 fewer acute care hospitals in California after their law passed. The research shows there's a causal relationship between the California staffing law and hospitals and ED closures. These are the comparisons of Massachusetts and California. So if you look at the studies that are done, Massachusetts is generally in the top 5 hospitals with safety and patient outcomes, where you can see California is rated now. This is a leapfrog study. It's a national survey done across all hospitals in the country, and you can see Massachusetts has the most hospitals in the A and B category. California has less than half. Right now, the state of Massachusetts has a vacancy of 1,200 nurses across the state. That's how many nurses we need today. This law going into place and putting those staffing ratios into place, we would need an additional 5,900 nurses for all of the hospitals in the state to meet this law. I worry, where do they think we'll get these nurses? Our concern is we'd pull them from the community. So VNA nurses, hospice nurses, nurses that work in doctor's offices and clinics would not be able, we would pull them into the hospital, leaving no one in the community to care for patients.
So while we are collecting and passing out, we will turn to I'm tempted to say a 3-minute period where you can talk again and address each other's points or finish points that you weren't able to make. There's so much material here, and the two of you are so well prepared and have so much data to share with us. So, Donna, take it away. Just, raise your index card, just wave it so that we can collect them while people are speaking.
Hello again. So I want to come back with some different data based on what my colleague just said. So first of all, she said that there is no data or research to support what these limits have looked like in California, which couldn't be more false. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid, which is actually independent, unlike Leapfrog, which is a pay-to-play organization that is paid for by the hospital associations. The federal agency publishes stats on hospital readmission rates, 30 days post-discharge. Mass is 6th worst amongst the 50 states, with the 6th highest readmission rate, 6th highest in federal fines. And California, in contrast, is the 10th lowest in readmission rates, has far better outcomes in terms of infection rates, readmissions, and it's all tied to nurse staffing. If you go to safepatientlimits.org, we have over 70 scientific, independent research papers that talk about, peer-reviewed, that talk about the implications of California and staffing. So the opposition saying there's just no research could not be more false. 47% faster times in the ED. And why is that? What causes you to languish in the ED? When there's not enough nurses in the ED, you sit there for hours and hours and hours. Not only that, but there could be a bed waiting for you on a med-surg floor or a psych floor, and there's just not enough nurses to take you out of the ED, and so we have the phenomena of boarding in the emergency room, which can all be prevented with the right number of nurses. So, and this idea that we don't have enough nurses, first of all, the number that my colleague said couldn't be more false. All the independent studies are coming out that's saying, on average, the farthest outlying number of nurses needed would be 2,500. We graduate 3,000 nurses every year in the state of Massachusetts. We already have enough nurses to do this. Not only that, but Massachusetts has the largest number of nurses working part-time or per diem who would love to work full-time, but the hospitals won't post those positions because they don't want to pay for the benefits. So there is no lack of money. The other thing I want to say is that the Hospital Association made $28 billion last year. $28 billion, with over $1 billion in reserves and over hundreds of millions of dollars in offshore accounts. So there is no lack of money to do this. What we have is a distribution problem, a corporate agenda.
So what I said about the research is that it's not supporting that ratios improve outcomes. All of those data that she's referring to do not state that a 4-to-1 ratio or a 6-to-1 ratio doesn't give you the magic number that says this will make your outcomes for your patients any better. So there is no evidence to support that. The Healthcare Policy Commission just last month, I believe, here in the state of Massachusetts did an independent study. They compared what this ballot is asking for the state of Massachusetts versus what they reviewed in the state of California. And they also concluded that the ballot, the standard and the mandated ratios did not improve patient outcomes in the state of California. New graduates. So she's talking about we graduate 2,500 new nurses. Right now, it takes 12 weeks to train a new nurse right out of school. When this ballot passes, if it should pass in November, it's effective January 1. I don't have 2,500 nurses that I could train in 6 weeks and be in time to be compliant with this law. It's just not physically possible. So the cost is phenomenal, $1.3 billion for hospitals across the state to roll this out. Right now, we have 13 hospitals already operating in the red. The worry and concern is adding this additional cost would throw them over the edge, and we too would see hospitals close across the state. Many of the smaller community hospitals would not be able to sustain this additional burden to running their daily operations. So my question is, if there are so many nurses divided on this question, then it's not the right answer. We have just as many nurses supporting a no vote as they do a yes vote. And we believe that we are standing on the side of what the patients need to serve them best. Thank you.
Because you're next. So the speakers will now summarize, close, do whatever they feel is appropriate to wrap up the appeal that they are making to you for their position and the yes or no vote on question 1. So we are going in the opposite order of the way we began. They will have 60 seconds, and we're beginning with you.
As I said, we are fighting for patient rights and patient safety. Right now, the state of Massachusetts is ranked in the top 10 across the nation for best health care provided. We have people coming to this state from all over the world to seek health care. We are doing a phenomenal job today. Our outcomes are good, our patients are safe. We have nurses in the hospitals that are feeling like they have great support and they get to do the work that they need to do. To afford some of this, some of the smaller hospitals will have to lay off other people. dietary aides, housekeepers, respiratory therapists, whatever they feel they need to do to pay for the additional nursing staff. That will compromise patient care. If the standard was California and they're doing such a phenomenal job, why after 20 years are they still the only state in the country that have mandated laws? It just does not work. Thank you.
The reason why we only have it in California is, unfortunately, we have a political system that's broken. We tried for over 20 years to get this passed through the legislation, and unfortunately, the Hospital Association, as I said to you before, made $28 billion in 1 year, have paid off many politicians, and that's the same across the United States. There are 8 other states currently right now in the United States that are trying to get this passed. And even on a national level, we've been trying to get this passed. This idea that my colleague keeps saying that there isn't any research is just plain wrong. I'm not really sure why that keeps being said. We have, like I said, over 70 peer-reviewed studies that show the dire consequences of what happens to patients when nurses care for patients, too many at one time. We have plenty of nurses who are already per diem and part-time, in addition to all that we graduate. They're ready to do this. So this idea that we don't have nurses is wrong. And the last thing I want to say, with a ballot initiative, the law may go into effect January of 2019, but everybody knows, including the opposition knows, it takes several months for a ballot to get implemented. Fines are not going to happen right away. The sky is not going to fall down. We're going to have plenty of time to get the regulations in place and do this right. Thank you.
Thank you. I just want to do a sound check, Brandon. If people are standing beside the podium, was that working for you or no? Okay, so we are really going to need to stand here at the podium and we will take some questions. And I'm thinking that it's not clear necessarily that these are addressed to both of you, but I would invite you to answer them if you choose. Now, here's just a clarification. It says, I believe the first PowerPoint screen of the no presentation said minimum limits would be set. The ballot question is asking to set maximum limits, does it not? Yes. Would we agree with that? Yes. Okay. Maximum limits. Only 5 nurses in a behavioral health setting. Do you want to come back up? Yep, sure. Thank you. We do want to be very clear.
So, maximum number. So on a psych unit, I'm a full-time psych nurse. Maximum number would be 5, so it's up to 5. Through the acuity tool and through my clinical judgment, if I am assigned patients that are really, really acute, then I have the opportunity to say, you know what, right now I think I can safely take care of 4. So this idea that there's no flexibility or movement within those numbers. And my colleague said, why are the numbers different in California and Massachusetts? Well, the truth of the matter is our patients have never been sicker. And that's the truth. If you're coming to a hospital, you are sick. And we have done more research and more outcomes, and we know that those numbers make sense. California, when they did this law, they did it 14 years ago. Healthcare has changed in 14 years, and patient conditions have changed in 14 years. So I hope that that sufficiently answers the question as to why we went with those numbers. Thank you.
Yes. So we're standing here, so we're definitely not straying off the recording mic. Thank you.
The way the law is written, the ballot is written now, does not give any flexibility. It is very rigid. For word, black and white, it is saying what exactly the ratios have to be. And so in today's market, today, if I have a nurse with 5 patients, she's on the orthopedic unit, for example, 2 patients are waiting for rides to go home. There's a patient in the OR or in the emergency room that needs to come upstairs. As the team, the nurse can decide, I can take that patient. So she would have 6 patients for about an hour till the patient leaves to go home. If this law passes, she cannot take another patient. She must wait till one of those patients physically leaves her assignment before somebody comes upstairs. That is how rigid this ballot is written. Thank you.
So I think this is best addressed, at least in the beginning, by you, Donna, and certainly Francis, my heavens. I was going to call you Mary. Thank you. Francis, feel free to chime in. How did the question 1 writers, come up with the ratios?
It's a really good question. We, in addition to looking at all the research, and again, we have lots and lots of research, independent research. We worked with California. We worked very closely with California. And we also did a survey after survey after survey of bedside nurses about where is your limit? Where is it that you start feeling like it's just too much? So it's based on years and years of clinical research, California outcomes, nurse bedside input, and we came up with those numbers. And I can tell you, the days that I have to take care of 7 or 8 patients on an inpatient locked psych unit, the days that I have to take care of 8 patients, the difference between 8 and 5, I can't even begin to tell you. This is not rocket science. If we're okay with limiting how many hours an airline pilot flies, if we're okay with limiting how many hours a truck driver drives, if we're okay with limiting how many children a child care provider takes care of, we should be okay with limiting how many patients a nurse cares for at one time, because it's the right thing to do.
Many hospitals follow guidelines from the National Nurses Association. So there are professional organizations of nurses that are nationally recognized that make a recommendation about how many nurses, for example, a labor and delivery nurse should take, an oncology nurse should take, an orthopedic nurse should take. Many hospitals work very hard to operate within those guidelines. Mercy is one of them. We have a behavioral health unit. We have a 131-bed psych hospital in Holyoke. Those nurses do have 8 patients. However, it's a team. It's not one nurse. It's the social worker, the substance abuse counselor, the therapist, the assistant. That team of people take care of those 8 patients. She's not alone in that therapy session. It's a different kind of nursing in psych than it is on a medical surgical floor. When the California law went into place, 50% of the nurses in California were from outside of California. They had to ship nurses in from across the country to come help take care of the patients to meet this law. I have friends that were both nurses and leaders in California. It's a different environment. Those nurses fly in from all over the country, work their shifts, and fly home. They make just as much money in 2 weeks as they would if they worked a full-time job in their home states. So those nurses are not committed to that environment. The nurses here in this state live, work in those communities, and care about those patients. The people that fly in and out of California do not contribute to the overall care of those patients.
We will be wrapping this up soon, but we will be wrapping up soon. We will take one more question after this, and we will ask that you limit your answer to a minute, but report.
So She talked about the American Nurses Association. The American Nurses Association of Massachusetts represents approximately 2,000 nurses. Less than 3% of those nurses are bedside nurses. Most of the nurses that are represented by the American Nurses Associations are nurse executives and nurse managers, many of which have been away from the bedside for years. They are not the voice of bedside nurses of Massachusetts. And though the M&A represents over 23,000 nurses, we understand we're also not just the nurses' voice. We have done due diligence with research and surveys independently to try to capture what all bedside nurses want, for you to have safe patient care. And this idea that nurses in California just like randomly came from other states, I have no idea where that information is coming from. 100,000 nurses, resident nurses of California, came back to the bedside when this law went into place because they said, finally, I can do it the way I'm supposed to be doing it all along.
Finally, and Francis, this will be addressed to you first. Knowing that staffing ratios, as proposed, are proven to reduce readmissions, med errors, falls, deaths, how does a no vote work toward improving outcomes of those things?
I've not seen that research. I am a nurse researcher. I've not seen that data. Those are just words that my colleague has thrown out, numbers that are not documented that I have seen. We all want safe patient care. That is not the issue. What's at stake right now is how we're going to achieve that. This ballot is not the right way. I'm worried that hospitals will start to close, communities will suffer because we're trying to make a one-size-fits-all across the state, regardless of the size of your hospital. So the hospitals in Boston area will have the same staffing as this area. And we don't see the same type of patients. We don't see the same kind of acuity. We can't sustain that. A no vote is the way to go until we can come up with a different initiative. This is not the right fix. Thank you.
Donna, 60 seconds? Sure.
So I'm just going to keep saying we have the research. I don't know why my colleague says we don't, but we do. Please go to safepatientlimits.org for the truth and the facts. We can do this. We absolutely can do this. We have the money. We have the nurses. We just have to have the will. And believe me, for 20 years, we tried working with the Massachusetts Hospital Association to do this. And they have fought us every step of the way. And they are fighting us now with your taxpayer dollars. More than 60% of their funding comes from Medicare and Medicaid, and they are spending upwards right now $27 million so far to deceive you, to get you to vote against yourself, the safety of your friends, your family, and your loved ones. To me, this has to happen. This is for you. We wrote it for you. We wrote it because it's the right thing to do. And we deserve a standard of care. And the hospitals in Boston are not different than the hospitals in Western Mass. They're not.
Thank you, speakers. This is a obviously hotly contested issue. I am hoping, audience, that we've all been given some food for thought, that there has been much good work done by journalists on this issue. I would definitely encourage you to Google everything that you can find, particularly to drill down on the research. This is for you to decide. We are going to the polls, and each of us really will be asked to see what we think about this question. You can read more. You can read the league positions at the bottom of the handout that you have. You can read a full description of what the act actually is on the Secretary of State's website, and so I refer you to that too. It's in red at the bottom of your handout. Thank you so much, Francis and Donna. Thank you for all your dedication to this, and thank you for being with us. We'll take a short break, but thank you. So I introduce to you Andrew Bloom, who is with American Promise, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization like the League, which is extremely interested in talking about how people govern and not money. So Andrew, I will let you talk about the question and introduce yourself however more fully you would like.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to thank Linda and the League of Women Voters for inviting me to speak at this forum tonight, and certainly thank all of you very much for coming out. My name is Andrew Bloom. I live in West Stockbridge. I'm a volunteer, as Linda said, with the American Promise organization, which is promoting a yes vote on Question 2 in Massachusetts and also similar initiatives nationwide.
Quiet.
Before I begin, here is an important piece of news that I just received yesterday. Governor Baker joins a long list of successful politicians who lament the money game that they have to play. He plays it, as do many Democrat endorsers, but they have to until the rules are changed for everyone, which he now joins other leading Republicans and Democrats in calling for. So what is this referendum question about? A yes vote is a vote for the creation of a citizen commission to consider and recommend to the legislature a 28th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution to put reasonable controls on money in politics and to establish that corporations and unions do not have the same constitutional rights as people. The commission would also prepare Massachusetts to ratify such an amendment once it goes before the American public. The Citizen Commission will be appointed by our top 5 state officials. The Governor, Attorney General, Secretary of State, and the House and Senate leaders will appoint 3 members each. The commission will consist of 15 volunteers, so there will be no cost to taxpayers. The commission's main task will be to research and draft proposed amendment language and promote it in the Massachusetts legislature. It will also analyze and report on the impact of unrestrained political spending in the Commonwealth. 19 states, including Massachusetts, and more than 800 cities and towns, some heavily Republican, some heavily Democrat, have already passed non-binding resolutions to ask Congress for a constitutional amendment to control money in politics. The Massachusetts Commission would go further than any other state to date, recommending that our legislature to send a formal request to the U.S. Congress and set a national precedent to help spur the citizen movement forward. We live where the first American Revolution started. In the spirit of the democratic government those people fought for, we in Massachusetts can lead a new revolution, this time to eliminate big money in politics and begin the urgent task of uncorrupting our government. So let's look closer at why we need to amend the Constitution. Simply put, big money in politics is the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Regardless of which party people identify with, or even for those who don't affiliate with any political party, the American people have lost faith and trust in our government because we have, to a very large degree, lost control of our government. Money, not the will of the public, is now the biggest factor determining who gets elected and holds power in America. Wealthy individuals and organizations, including corporations, unions, and special interest groups, have far more influence on our elected officials than we do. Our government is no longer of, by, and for the people. We face many critical problems on many fronts, and every one of them is important. However, big money in politics is the first domino that needs to fall. If it doesn't, our other problems will become increasingly difficult to resolve, and they will likely become worse at an accelerating rate. Our legislators have not addressed the problem. The reason, it appears, is that restricting campaign spending would be biting off the hand that feeds them. The McCain-Feingold Act, passed in 2002, was a bipartisan effort to begin to address this enormous problem. It wasn't perfect, but it was a very important step in the right direction. The Supreme Court has demonstrated that it won't change things. They ruled in Buckley versus Vallejo in 1976 that spending money on campaigns is the same as free speech. So any limits would violate the First Amendment. Then they ruled in Citizens United versus the Federal Election Commission in 2010 that since earlier decisions had established that corporations and unions and special interest groups have the same rights as individuals, extremely wealthy organizations have the same right to unpolitical spending as you and I. Very often when I discuss the problem of money in politics with people, they'll quickly glaze over and they'll say things like, it's impossible to fix. There is nothing you can do. I respond to this with a great analogy I heard from Lawrence Lessig, a Harvard law professor who is very passionate about this issue. He says, suppose a doctor tells you that your child has an incurable disease and that there is nothing you can do. Does this mean for even 1 second you would stop doing every possible thing to help your child? Of course not. Similarly, if we love our country like we love our children, we will not be daunted by the difficulty of the task at hand or the odds of its success. Remember, the Constitution has been amended 27 times, and there is enormous and growing bipartisan public support for the issue. Very few Americans believe that big money in politics is a good idea. So let's proceed with the task at hand. The Founding Fathers established Article 5 in the Constitution to empower the public to pass constitutional amendments to guarantee that neither Congress nor the courts have the final say over how America operates. Article 5 establishes that the voters, you and I, retain the ultimate power to set the basic rules for how our country is run. It takes 33 states to require Congress to send an amendment out for formal ratification and then 38 to adopt it. And 19 have already said that they want such an amendment. We have strong and rapidly growing momentum to make this happen. Some will say that this kind of constitutional amendment that limits political spending violates the First Amendment protection of free speech. Many Americans, like me, will say that money is not really speech at all, but rather it is merely an amplifier of speech that enables the voices of the very wealthy to drown out the voices of everyone else. However, even if we all accept the premise that money is speech, there are numerous precedents of reasonable limits being placed on our free speech rights for the common good. Examples of this are, you cannot stand on a corner promoting a violent overthrow of our government. You can't yell fire in a crowded theater. You can't distribute child pornography. Placing reasonable limits on election spending is similarly and very clearly in the public interest. It is an appropriate balance of protecting individual freedom and protecting the common good. A constitutional amendment establishing reasonable controls on political spending would not eliminate campaign spending. It would only set appropriate parameters to level the playing field so that no one's voice is louder and more influential just because they have deeper pockets. It would allow everyone to speak and be heard and influence our government equally as the Founding Fathers intended. After the infamous Citizens United decision in 2010, 90% of Americans, 9 people out of every 10 across all parties, said they wanted that ruling overturned. The strong bipartisan appeal of returning control of our government to the people offers an opportunity to bring people together at a time when divisions are tearing America apart. Control of government by the very wealthy advances selfish special interests rather than the greater public good. The amendment that Question 2 promotes could encourage progress on many critical issues, restore true democracy and faith and trust in our government, bring people together, and help a divided America heal. In summary, a yes vote on Question 2 will establish a volunteer commission to work with our legislators to draft language to amend the U.S. Constitution, allowing for reasonable limits on political campaign spending. Send this proposed amendment language to the U.S. Congress and urge Congress to send it out to all 50 states for ratification. The larger the yes vote on Question 2, the stronger the mandate will be for our legislators to act. I'd like to thank, again, the League of Women Voters for inviting me this evening and for all of your time and consideration, and I will be very glad to answer your questions as best I can.
Thank you. So do we have any questions from the audience? I do have one advanced question from the League, and I think you have alluded to it, but the question is, this is from the League member who sent in a play. The Equal Rights Amendment was first introduced in 1921 by Alice Paul, a suffragist. It was passed by Congress eventually in 1972, but it still has not been ratified. So how realistic is it really to think that our nation could agree today in modern times on an amendment like this?
That is a great question. Let's be realistic. I mean, in our nation's history, let's be realistic. Amending the Constitution is no small feat. However, it's been done 27 times. Only 7 of those times have been to overturn Supreme Court rulings. Okay, so it is a large task, it's a daunting task, but the path is there. Our forefathers gave us the path. Is it simple? No. Democracy is not simple. So we don't look at the odds, as my example from Lawrence Lessig said. We just buckle down and we get to work. Because what's the alternative? We can cave and we can watch things continue to spiral downward as money in politics accelerates corporate control of our political and legal processes, or we can look this in the eye and we do what needs to be done. Just that one question?
Yes. Finally, Question 3. The third question will uphold current Massachusetts law passed 2 years ago that prohibits discrimination based on gender identity in places of public accommodation. A closely watched ballot initiative around the nation. And here to speak for a yes vote, yes, you approve of the current Massachusetts law, is April Griffith from Freedom for All Massachusetts. Thank you, April.
Thank you, Linda. I want to thank the League for approving a yes vote encouragement, and I'd like to thank you specifically, the attendings, for listening and giving us opportunity to speak. As Linda introduced me, I'm April Griffith. I'm from the Yes on 3 campaign. I'm an advocate. And can everybody hear me okay? Brandon is okay. I get to go last, so I get to learn from everyone else's mistakes. So we are fast approaching an election of historic civil rights significance in Massachusetts. On November 6th, we run the risk of being the first state to extend these protections to transgender people and then have them removed. we cannot let that be our legacy. We cannot go down in history as one of the states to first go against civil rights, to first take away rights once granted. As of right now, the entirety of New England extends equal rights and protections to transgender people based on gender identity, and this election is going to decide if Massachusetts is going to continue being a leader in equality and a leader in civil rights in New England, or if we're going to fall behind. Stripping transgender people of basic protections in an attempt to hinder sexual predators is faulty, illogical thinking and harms an innocent group while doing nothing to protect sexual assault victims or the potential victims. Sophie Hansen, a sexual assault survivor and Yes on 3 donor, said, and this is a direct quote, "If the No side really cared about sexual assault survivors, they would support effective methods for reducing sexual assault, not roll back basic protections for transgender people." The No on 3 campaign will claim they're trying to repeal these laws to protect women and children, but they do this hypocritically. Repealing the protections for transgender people does nothing more to protect cis women and children and places trans women and children directly in harm's way. And this is not an insignificant number of Bay Staters. Recent adjustments to census data show that there are between 150 and 200,000 transgender people in Massachusetts, a population larger than Hampshire County that could potentially lose their rights or protections if we don't vote yes on 3. It isn't always clear who is transgender, unlike myself, and who isn't. Statistically, if you've met 100 to 150 people, you've met at least 1 or 2 transgender people without ever knowing it. I'd like to take a minute here to ask a couple of questions of the audience. I know you guys are going to get a chance to ask me questions, so I'd like to ask you a couple of questions first. How many people here know a transgender individual? Wow, that is, that's incredible. Well, for everybody who didn't have their hands up, you just met one now. And if you are among the people that did have your hands up and you feel comfortable speaking with someone who didn't, I would appreciate you sharing those stories to tell other people that you know somebody who would be directly impacted by this law and by this repeal.
Are you aware that our CEO is transgender?
I am not, and I am now.
Would you repeat that for that?
Yes, I was just informed, very helpfully, thank you, that the CEO of the League of Women Voters...
No.
Oh, of Loomis. Oh, okay.
Loomis Community.
Of Loomis Community is transgender, which is wonderful and probably someone you all know. Okay.
He was David, now he's Lauren.
Her name is Lauren? Excellent.
He was David, now he's Lauren.
All right. I have another question, and this one mostly goes to the women assembled, League of Women. How many of you have been impacted by a law or social norm or rule that was restricting of your rights and your abilities to move through society and make your own decisions in order to ostensibly protect you from men? So think in terms of how many people have been told you have to dress a certain way in school or the boys will be distracted. You don't go out at night because men will get you. You travel in groups because men are dangerous. How many of these laws are actually prohibiting the men from doing anything to you, and how many of them are trying to legislate your behavior? Let's face it, all the time. Your whole life. This is another example of that, where the No on 3 people are trying to limit and restrict behavior of transgender women specifically. Let's face it, they're not after the transgender men going into men's rooms. And by doing so, limit how transgender women move through the society so men won't be able to do something? Does that make any sense to anybody else? No. To limit the rights of women to prevent men from doing, a small group of men too, I don't want to throw all men under the bus, a small group of men doing something illegal, we're going to legislate how women behave. Does that seem right to anybody else? No. I would hope not. The No on 3 campaign will use scare tactics based on lies, claiming the protections transgender people already have. This is the law as of 2016. Like, it has been in place for 2 years, and nothing is going to change if you vote yes. for the last 2 years somehow endangers women and children, when in fact the Boston Globe published the findings of a Williams Institute study this September that looked at 2 years prior to 2016, so from 2014 to 2016, they looked at the statistics before the law went into place, and then they looked at the 2 years afterwards, from 2016 to 2018, and the events of bathroom crimes, which are one of the major No on 3 talking points, there was no difference. 2014, before the law went into effect, was exactly the same as 2016, as 2017, as 2018. This didn't increase any danger for anybody to give transgender people equal rights. Now, the Yes on 3 campaign believes in Massachusetts values facts and data over fear tactics. I'm not going to try to scare you. I'm not going to say there's boogeymen in bathrooms after you. I'm going to provide you with the facts as they're before us, the study that I cited, and I encourage you to look it up. The Boston Globe is a fantastic newspaper. And we care deeply about the civil liberties and equality for everybody at Yes on 3 and Freedom for All in Massachusetts, which is an arm of Freedom for All America. I ask you, are we a state that will turn on our neighbors and people who need our protection most because of fear tactics and lies? Are Bay Staters susceptible to unfounded fears, or do we think harder than that? Which is why we cannot be the first state in the unit to take away rights from minorities. We cannot be the first state to walk away from a group in need. Let's face it, voter apathy cost us a lot in 2016. And I don't think we're going to know quite how much we lost in 2016 because some people in some places didn't care or thought it was an impossible thing. They believed the improbable was impossible. And this allowed them to change their normal behavior. People who might have voted stayed home in very important places, and it changed our nation because of it. We must learn the hard lesson of the last election cycle taught to us and take nothing for granted. Polls are only as accurate as the people responding to them are honest. If the polls in Massachusetts say Bay Staters support equal rights, that we're voting yes in large enough numbers to win, make it your business to drive those numbers up. We need to send a message, not just to the people in Massachusetts who would take away rights from a protected minority. We need to send a message to the entirety of the country. This November, we need to send the message that when a hate group considers attacking the rights of a group, they'll look to Massachusetts, they'll see what we did, they'll see how we voted to protect equal rights and protect vulnerable members of our community, and they'll think twice about doing it anywhere else. This November, vote yes for truth, vote yes for equality, vote yes on 3. Thank you.
We can pass the mic for questions. Does anyone want to question, comment?
The question is, how did question 3 get on the ballot? That's an important question and leads me to more statistics, which I love to pass out. So if something is passed through the legislature and signed by the governor, all it needs to be removed is is called a ballot repeal. And to get a ballot repeal onto the ballot, like question 3, you need a certain number of signatures. The number of signatures to do that is astoundingly low in Massachusetts, as in 30,000. And so one organization, if you enjoy ballot stuff and politics the way I do, you can go on Ballotopedia and look up all the information on this question there. The opponents who created this ballot measure got 33,000 signatures, which is 10% over what they needed, but in a state the size of Massachusetts, does 33,000 sound like all that many people? And they want to tell us who can and can't have rights after we elected, every single elected official we sent to the state legislature got more than 33,000 votes from somebody. And so if we elected them to represent us, do we really want that small of a number of people telling us how to vote, telling us how to live, telling us what our state constitution can and can't do? As I said before, the census data in Massachusetts shows there's between 150 and 200,000 transgender people. If we wanted to get a ballot measure on there, we would have 5 times what they got. And so we can't let the fears of the minority overrule the will of the majority. Thank you for asking that. The question is there any history of men posing as transgender women to assault women in restrooms? Anecdotal, very, 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 very small numbers, and very, very rarely. There has been an increase in peeping Tom crimes in bathrooms, but none of it's perpetrated by transgender women or even men pretending to be transgender women. It's perpetrated by people with tiny cameras who aren't even in the bathroom when the crime takes place. They place the camera and leave. And so the invention of tiny cameras has actually led to far more danger for people in the bathrooms than transgender women ever did. And ultimately, all those things are still illegal right now. You can't go into the bathroom and assault somebody. Doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter how you're dressed up. Doesn't matter what you identify as. You can't do that. Repealing this law won't change that either. It's illegal now to do that, and if you vote yes on number 6, it'll be illegal then too. Sexual assault and rape aren't impacted by this one way or the other. They're all still illegal. Thank you.
Any more questions? Thank you so much, April, for an enlightening and personal presentation. I will let you know. Thank you. I want to let you know that the League of Women Voters is doing a study. It will be a 2-year study on the actual ballot initiative process. Do we have this right? So you will be hearing more about that, and we will probably invite you to a presentation. We're taking a look at all of it, including how many signatures does it take to get, is that what we want? We do deep research, and we have many discussions, and then we will have a position on Massachusetts ballot initiatives. So thank you so much on behalf of the League for being empowered voters and for defending our democracy and for making your voice heard at the ballot box in early voting starting October 22nd or on Election Day, November 6th. Thank you so much. And thank you for Springfield Community TV for being with us. This will be online. You will be able to recommend it to your friends. I'll make sure everyone knows where it is when it goes up. Thank you, Brendan.